So earlier this week I made my way to Boneyard Blacksmiths in London, and they specialise in teaching people how to forge high quality kitchen knives from scratch. They also do a lesson on making a Damascus steel billet. This is the one I made. So this was a really interesting process. So I arrived, got kitted up in gloves, goggles and an apron, and then with a master blacksmith Dan selected two high carbon steels to fuse together to make Damascus steel. And the process of that is you heat up a forge to around 1000 degrees, and then the steel is molten hot. First you weld them together to make it into like a steel sandwich, and then you use a 20-ton press to fuse this molten hot steel together, and then additionally with the folder to make sure it's the same width throughout. You do this to make a 12-layered Damascus steel, and then you cut that steel again to make it a 36-layer Damascus steel. The next step of the process of this fused 36-layered Damascus steel was to stick it in a vise and literally twist it in place to make that laddered Damascus steel effect. You cool it, and then you grind off the edges to make sure all the edges are really smooth. And then what the magic of Damascus steel is the etching process. So dipping this, what is a very shiny piece of metal, into ferric chloride, no more than 5 seconds. And then when it comes up, you can see the Damascus pattern. It's incredible. I had a quick interview with Dan shortly after to talk about more of the technical details of Damascus steel. So if you want to see what he had to say about Damascus steel, then continue watching here. Yeah, so can you just give us a bit of a brief of like your name, what you do, and where we are?
So I'm Dan. I'm the head blacksmith teacher here at Boneyard London, down in Twickenham. So we teach lots of courses on blacksmithing, one of them being the Damascus making course that you've come on today.
Of course, yes, and I have made a Damascus steel billet. This being the one.
There it is. It's quite a long boy.
Yes, it is very long. It almost looks like a sword.
Yeah, really.
So can you tell us what steels are within this Damascus steel?
So today we used two types of high carbon steel, one of them being 1084 and the other one being 15N20.
Brilliant. And earlier at the start of the day, you were telling me about how the nickel reacts differently with those different types of steels. Could you go through that one?
Yeah, so throughout the day, we've basically been fusing those two steels together. And what that means is it's kind of formed one giant block of metal. Now, one of those metals we used, 15N20, has a bit of nickel in it. And that means that when we polish it up, dunk it in some acid, acid is a little bit, the nickel is a little bit more resistant to the acid, so it eats it away at a slightly different rate. So you kind of get two different levels of metal, and that is one of the reasons why you get the difference in color. You get those nice wavy patterns through the metal. Yeah. You should be able to feel like nice little bumps just along the metal.
Brilliant. And that's, I guess, when we've looked at the Damascus steel knives you have on like display here, if you run your fingertip through them, you can feel those bumps along those waves.
Yeah, exactly.
Speaking of those waves and those patterns, at what point in the process do you see the waves? Because on this current, I guess, billet here, there are no waves present, but there's an additional process, isn't there?
So once you cut into it and you polish it off, you then have to go through another stage, which is submerging it in some acid. And then that starts to eat away at the metal at different rates. Like I said, the nickel being more resistant, so it eats it away a lot slower. And that's when you get the different colours in the metal and you see all the patterns coming through. So it's not instant, you have to go through that extra process to get the pattern, but it's there.
Of course, and there are more than like one type of pattern, aren't there? You have your ladder patterns and then your random patterns, is that correct?
Yeah, so you've got loads of different types of patterns effectively, but those are the two main ones we do here. Random pattern being you just squish the metal together and it's random. You see what you get at the end. The ladder pattern is effectively the same thing, but there's an extra stage, which is the one you did, and that is basically twisting the metal. And it kind of twists it and forms these little lines going across where the metal kind of interlocks between itself. Yeah. And that's why you get a sort of ladder pattern going through the metal.
Yeah. Brilliant. So yeah, of course, so I've made the ladder pattern billet over here. You made a random one there.
Yep.
So they'll, I guess, essentially look the same, but have slight differences in terms of the waviness or
yours will have some lines running straight through it, and mine will have more sort of like blobs of metal. So very different patterns at the end of the day.
Brilliant. Then one last question as well. So if you cut directly through Damascus steel, will you see that pattern throughout, or is it only on the outside?
No, it's only once you submerge it in the acid. So the pattern is there, but it's not visible until you cut it, polish it off, and then submerge it in the acid, because the acid is the bit that eats it away at different rates and gives you that pattern. Without that, you could cut that in the middle and it would just look like normal steel.
Yeah, so then you submerge it again and polish it again to reveal that pattern. Yeah. Okay, brilliant.